Part 4 of the Life of Saint Macrina by Saint Gregory of Nyssa, translated by W.K. Lowther Clark, B.D. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. They find on the body marks of Macrina's sanctity. When we had decided on this, and it was necessary for that sacred body to be robed in linen, we divided the work and applied ourselves to our different tasks. I ordered one of my men to bring the robe, but Vestiana, above mentioned, was decking that holy head with her own hands, when she put her hand on the neck. "See," she said, looking at me, "what sort of an ornament has hung on the saint's neck." As she spoke, she loosened the fastener behind, then stretched out her hand and showed us the representation of a cross of iron and a ring of the same material, both of which were fastened by a slender thread and rested continually on the heart. "Let us share the treasure," I said. "You have the phylactery of the cross. I will be content with inheriting the ring." For the cross had been traced on the seal of this too. Looking at it, the lady said to me again, "You have made no mistake in choosing this treasure, for the ring is hollow in the loop, and in it has been hidden a particle of the cross of life, and so the mark on the seal above shows what is hidden below." But when it was time that the pure body should be wrapped in its robes, the command of the great departed one made it necessary for me to undertake the ministry. But the sister who shared with me that great inheritance was present and joined in the work. "Do not let the great wonders accomplished by the saint pass unnoticed," she remarked, laying bare part of the breast. "What do you mean?" I said. "Do you see," she said, "this small faint mark below the neck? It was like a scar made by a small needle." As she spoke, she brought the lamp near to the place she was showing me. "What is there surprising," I said, "if the body has been branded with some faint mark in this place?" "This," she replied, "has been left on the body as a token of God's powerful help. For there grew once in this place a cruel disease, and there was a danger either that the tumor should require an operation, or that the complaint should become quite incurable, if it should spread to the neighborhood of the heart. Her mother implored her often and begged her to receive the attention of a doctor, since the medical art, she said, was sent from God for the saving of men. But she judged it worse than the pain to uncover any part of the body to a stranger's eyes. So when evening came, after waiting on her mother as usual with her own hands, she went inside the sanctuary and besought the God of healing all night long. A stream of tears fell from her eyes onto the ground, and she used the mud made by the tears as a remedy for her ailment. Then, when her mother felt despondent, and again urged her to allow the doctor to come, she said it would suffice for the cure of her disease if her mother would make the holy seal on the place with her own hand. But when the mother put her hand within her bosom to make the sign of the cross on the part, the sign worked and the tumor disappeared. "But this," said she, "is the tiny trace of it. It appeared then in place of the frightful sore and remained until the end, that it might be, as I imagine, a memorial of the divine visitation, an occasion and reminder of perpetual thanksgiving to God." When our work came to an end, and the body had been decked with the best we had on the spot, the deaconess spoke again, maintaining that it was not fitting that she should be seen by the eyes of the virgins, robed like a bride. "But I have," she said, "laid by one of your mother's dark-colored robes, which I think would do well laid over her, that this holy beauty be not decked out with the unnecessary splendor of clothing." Her counsel prevailed, and the robe was laid upon the body. But she was resplendent even in the dark robe, divine power having added, as I think, this final grace to the body, so that, as in the vision of my dream, rays actually seemed to shine forth from her beauty. The all-night vigil, a crowd of visitors arrives. But while we were thus employed, and the virgins' voices singing psalms mingled with the lamentations were filling the place, somehow the news had quickly spread throughout the whole neighborhood, and all the people that lived near were streaming towards the place, so that the entrance hall could no longer hold the concourse. When the all-night vigil for her, accompanied by hymn singing, as in the case of martyrs' festivals, was finished, and the dawn came, the multitude of men and women that had flocked in from all the neighboring country were interrupting the psalms with wailings. But I, sick at heart though I was owing to the calamity, was yet contriving, so far as was possible with what we had, that no suitable accompaniment of such a funeral should be omitted. Gregory makes the funeral arrangements. I divided the visitors according to sex, and put the crowds of women with the band of virgins, while the men folk I put in the ranks of the monks. I arranged that the psalms should be sung by both sexes in rhythmical and harmonious fashion, as in chorus singing, so that all the voices should blend suitably. But since the day was progressing, and the entire space of the retreat was getting crowded with the multitude of arrivals, the bishop of that district, Araxios by name, who had come with the entire complement of his priests, ordered the funeral procession to start slowly, for there was a long way to go, and the crowd seemed likely to impede brisk movement. At the same time as he gave this order, he summoned to him all present who shared with him in the priesthood, that the body might be borne by them. When this had been settled, and his directions were being carried out, I got under the bed and called Araxios to the other side. 2 other distinguished priests took the hinder part of the bed. Then I went forward, slowly as was to be expected, our progress being but gradual. For the people thronged round the bed, and all were insatiable to see that holy sight, so that it was not easy for us to complete our journey. On either side we were flanked by a considerable number of deacons and servants, escorting the bier in order, all holding wax tapers. The whole thing resembled a mystic procession, and from beginning to end the voices blended in singing psalms, that, for example, that comes in the hymn of the 3 children. 7 or 8 stades intervened between the retreat and the abode of the holy martyrs, in which also the bodies of our parents were laid. With difficulty did we accomplish the journey in the best part of a day, for the crowds that came with us, and those that were constantly joining us, did not allow our progress to be what we wished. Arrival at the church, the burial service. But when we got inside the church, we laid down the bed and turned first to prayer. But our prayer was the signal for the people's lamentations to start again. For when the voice of psalmody was still, and the virgins gazed on that holy face, and the grave of our parents was already being opened, in which it had been decided that Macrina should be laid, a woman cried out impulsively that after this hour we should see that divine face no more. Then the rest of the virgins cried out the same, and a disorderly confusion disturbed the orderly and solemn chanting of psalms, all being upset at the wailing of the virgins. With difficulty did we succeed in procuring silence by our gesture, and the precentor taking the lead and intoning the accustomed prayers of the church, the people composed themselves at last to prayer. The family grave is opened. When the prayer had come to its due close, fear entered my mind of transgressing the divine command, which forbids us to uncover the shame of father or mother. And how, said I, shall I escape such condemnation, if I gaze at the common shame of human nature made manifest in the bodies of my parents, since they are all decayed and dissolved, as must be expected, and turned into foul and repulsive shapelessness? As I thought of these things, and the anger of Noah against his son was striking fear into me, the story of Noah advised me what was to be done. Before the lid of the grave was lifted sufficiently to reveal the bodies to our gaze, They were covered by a pure linen cloth stretched across from each end. And now that the bodies were hidden under the cloth, we, myself that is, and the aforementioned bishop of the district, took up that holy body from the bed and laid it down by the side of the mother, thus fulfilling the common prayer of both. For both were with one voice asking God for this boon all their lives long, that their bodies should be mingled with one another after death, and that their comradeship in life should not even in death be broken. The funeral over, Gregory returns home. But when we had completed all the accustomed funeral rites, and it became necessary to return home, I first threw myself on the grave and embraced the dust, and then I started on my way back, downcast and tearful, pondering over the greatness of my loss. On my way, I met a distinguished soldier who had a military command in a little city of Pontus named Sevastopolis, and dwelt there with his subordinates. He met me in friendly fashion when I reached the town, and was greatly disturbed to hear of the calamity, for he was linked to us by ties both of relationship and friendship. He told me a story of a marvelous episode in her life, which I shall incorporate into my history and then close my tale. When we had ceased our tears and had entered into conversation, he said to me, "Learn what manner of goodness has been taken away from human life." With this prelude he began his narrative. The Soldier's Story. My wife and I once had an earnest desire to pay a visit to the School of Virtue, for so I think the place ought to be called, in which that blessed soul had her abode. Now there lived with us also our little daughter, who had been left with an affliction of the eye after an infectious illness, and her appearance was hideous and pitiable, the membrane round the eye being enlarged and whitish from the complaint. But when we came inside that divine abode, my wife and I separated in our visit to those seekers after philosophy according to our sects. I went to the men's department, presided over by Peter your brother, while my wife went to the women's side and conversed with the saint. And when a suitable interval had elapsed, we considered it time to depart from the retreat, and already our preparations were being made for this, but kind protests were raised from both sides equally. Your brother was urging me to stay and partake of the philosopher's table, and the blessed lady would not let my wife go, but holding our little girl in her bosom, said she would not give her up before she had prepared a meal for them, and had entertained them with the riches of philosophy. And kissing the child, as was natural, and putting her lips to her eyes, she saw the complaint of the pupil and said, "If you grant me this favor and share our meal, I will give you in return a reward not unworthy of such an honor." "What is that?" said the child's mother. "I have a drug," said the great lady, "which is powerful to cure eye complaints." And then news was brought me from the women's apartments, telling me of this promise, and we gladly remained, thinking little of the pressing necessity of starting on our journey. But when the feast came to an end, and we had said the prayer, great Peter waiting on us with his own hands and cheering us, and when holy Macrina had dismissed my wife with all courtesy, then at last we went home together with glad and cheerful hearts, telling one another as we journeyed what had befallen us. I described to her what had happened in the men's room, both what I had heard and seen. She told every detail as in a history, and thought nothing ought to be left out, even the smallest points. She told everything in order, keeping the sequence of the narrative. When she came to the point at which the promise was made to cure the child's eyes, she broke off her tale. "Oh, what have we done?" she cried. "How could we have neglected the promise, the salve cure that the lady said she would give?" I was vexed at the carelessness, and bade someone run back quickly to fetch it. Just as this was being done, the child, who was in her nurse's arms, looked at her mother, and the mother looked at the child's eyes. "Stop," she said, being vexed at the carelessness. She cried aloud with joy and fright. "For see, nothing of what was promised us is lacking. She has indeed given her the true drug which cures disease. It is the healing that comes from prayer. She has both given it, and it has already proved efficacious, and nothing is left of the affliction of the eye. It is all purged away by that divine drug." And as she said this, she took up the child and laid her in my arms. And I understood the marvels of the gospel that hitherto had been incredible to me, and said, "What is there surprising in the blind recovering their sight by the hand of God, when now His handmaiden, accomplishing those cures by faith in Him, has worked a thing not much inferior to those miracles?" Such was his story. It was interrupted by sobs, and tears choked his utterance. So much for the soldier and his tale. Conclusion. I do not think it advisable to add to my narrative all the similar things that we heard from those who lived with her and knew her life accurately. For most men judge what is credible in the way of a tale by the measure of their own experience. But what exceeds the capacity of the hearer, men receive with insult and suspicion of falsehood, as remote from truth. Consequently, I omit that extraordinary agricultural operation in the famine time, how that the corn for relief of need, though constantly distributed, suffered no perceptible diminution, remaining always in bulk the same as it was before distributed to the needs of the suppliants. And after this, there are happenings still more surprising, of which I might tell. Healings of diseases, and casting out of demons, and true predictions of the future. All are believed to be true, even though apparently incredible, by those who have investigated them accurately. But by the carnally minded they are judged outside the possible. Those, I mean, who do not know that according to the proportion of faith, so is given the distribution of spiritual gifts. Little to those of little faith, much to those who have plenty of sea-room in their religion. And so, lest the unbeliever should be injured by being led to disbelieve the gifts of God, I have abstained from a consecutive narrative of these sublime wonders, thinking it sufficient to conclude my life of Macrina with what has been already said. End of Part 4. End of The Life of Saint Macrina by Saint Gregory of Nyssa. Translated by W. K. Lowther Clark, B.D.